Welcome. Tonight, we'll travel back in time to discover what life was really like for an ordinary medieval peasant. Not a king, not a knight, and not a wealthy merchant, but a simple person whose days were shaped by hard work, changing seasons, and the constant struggle to survive. If you enjoy calm history stories to fall asleep to, consider subscribing to the channel. Now, get comfortable, relax, and let this story carry you back hundreds of years into the past. Let's begin. Imagine a world without cars, without electricity, without shops where you can buy anything in minutes. A world where the sun determines the day, and life depends solely on the weather, the land, and the work of one's own hands. This was the daily life of most people in the Middle Ages. And although we often think of knights, castles, and kings, the truth is that the vast majority of society lived somewhere else entirely. They lived in the countryside, on small farms, in simple wooden houses. They were peasants, and it was their lives that formed the foundation of the entire world we know from history. The day began very early, often before sunrise. The cottage was dark and cold. The lack of glass in the windows, the lack of insulation, and the lack of heating as we understand it today made mornings difficult. The only source of light and warmth was the fire in the hearth. The first steps were usually directed towards the animals: cows, goats, pigs, sometimes a few chickens. They were the key to survival. If they were healthy, the family had milk, cheese, and eggs. If they became ill, the problem began. Breakfast wasn't like modern meals. It was simple, quick, and meant to give you the energy to work. Bread, groats, oatmeal, or leftovers from the previous day. Meat appeared rarely, often only on holidays or special occasions. Water from rivers or wells wasn't always safe, so drinking weak beer, which was more sterile than plain water, was common. This wasn't alcohol in the modern sense, but a daily drink that wasn't harmful to your health. After breakfast, the most important part of the day began: work. And it was work that never ended. Most peasants didn't own the land they cultivated. The land belonged to the feudal lord, and in exchange for the right to use it, they had to give up a portion of the harvest or work in his fields. It was a system of dependence that lasted for generations. Field work was hard and completely dependent on nature. There were no machines, tractors, or even the simple tools that seem so obvious today. The land was plowed with wooden plows, often assisted by oxen. Sowing was done by hand, and harvesting the crops required enormous amounts of time and energy. Every day was a struggle for the future, for whether there would be enough to eat in the winter. Peasant homes were small, often one-roomed. The entire family lived in one room: parents, children, sometimes grandparents. In winter, animals would also come inside, as their warmth helped them survive the frost. Privacy was practically non-existent. Everything was shared. Everything was open. Everything was part of a single, simple life. Children were part of the work from a very young age. The model of childhood we know today did not exist. Children were not shielded from responsibilities. On the contrary, from an early age, they helped with the animals, carried water, gathered wood, and performed simple tasks. Education was a luxury available only to a few. Most peasant children never learned to read or write. Their future was predetermined by the place where they were born. Religion permeated every aspect of life. The church was not only a place of prayer, but also the center of community. It was where people met, where holidays were celebrated, where answers to questions that could not be explained otherwise were sought. The world was full of uncertainty. Disease, famine, war, and death were part of everyday life. Faith provided a sense of order and meaning. Medicine was very simple and often ineffective. There were no antibiotics or modern treatments. Even minor infections could be dangerous. Life was short, and death was almost ubiquitous. To a modern person, this may sound overwhelming, but for the people of that time, it was normal. The most difficult period was winter. Then, everything became a struggle for survival. Food supplies dwindled, field work was impossible, and the cold seeped into homes. If the summer was poor and the harvest failed, the entire community could suffer hunger. Every day of winter was a test of endurance. Yet peasant life wasn't all suffering. There were also moments of rest, holidays, and communal gatherings. During these moments, music, dancing, and food, which was normally unavailable, emerged. People lived closely together, and community was their greatest strength. Without it, survival would be impossible. The medieval peasant lived in a difficult but stable world. Each day was similar to the one before, and the rhythm of life was determined by the seasons. There was no rush, but there was also no choice. What seems like a limitation today was the only reality back then. And while it's easy to look at this life from today's perspective and see only burden and lack of comfort, it's worth remembering that it was these people who kept the entire world moving. Without their work, there would be no cities, no trade, no history as we know it today. And now, you can slowly rest. Good night.